Welcome to the Fully Mindful, where we explore what it means to live with intention, creativity, authenticity, and connection. I'm your host, Melissa Chareau, mindfulness and breathwork facilitator, neurodivergent lawyer and coach, and fellow human navigating this wild and beautiful ride we call life. On this podcast, we dive deep with interviews featuring inspiring guests, share solo mini episodes packed with guided mindfulness practices to help you center and thrive, and mix things up with tangents and sidebars, where my friend and fellow podcaster Debbie Harrell from the New World Normal joins me for some real, random, and meaningful conversations. So if you're ready to pause, reflect, and expand, you're in the right place. Let's get fully mindful.
See, if I was listening to this podcast, if I was in my time machine and I listened to this podcast 3 years ago, I wouldn't have identified with it because it was so unconscious. Mm-hmm. I would have listened to it and gone, "Oh, there's people who don't trust their bodies. Oh, that's sad." I wouldn't have thought of that as me because I didn't know it until I had the embodied experience, which then gave me access to that knowing. And so for me, somatic work and particularly working in a body-oriented coaching space, to use another metaphor, was just such a no-brainer. I mean, literally, it was like, okay, brain, thank you. You've done a really good job. You can go now. Your time is up and we need to start thinking in other spaces.
The first time I heard Dr. Paul Taylor Pitt was at the ungodly hour of 7 a.m. on a Saturday. I was going to be spending the entire day with him, the weekend actually, along with a dozen other souls looking at transforming our lives and those around us crazy enough to ask us for help. It was the somatic school, and we were in for a long program. He showed up with a funny 80s Hawaiian shirt, yes, that's actually a thing, and just this gorgeous, deep Scottish accented voice. And I knew I would trust him with anything and everything. He just had that air about him, and he never proved me wrong. Dr. Paul, or Paul as he insists being called, is an incredible teacher. He balances a genuine self-deprecation with grounded confidence and curiosity and a spirit of collective experimentation. It's pretty fucking awesome. No wonder he's a successful organizational and somatic coach, having been recognized with awards such as HR's Most Influential Thinkers 2022 from HR Magazine, and Organizational Development Network's 2023 Global Award for Organizational Excellence and Impact. Yeah, that's just among many over his long career. But it wasn't until one fateful day at the gym that he really found his calling, somatics. And he's pursued a somatic, or what we also call embodied, approach to his organizational development and personal coaching. And to say this has enriched his experience as well as those of his clients is kind of an understatement. Add to this his LGBTQIA plus advocacy, including authoring a gay Scottish folk story, yes, a first, and with a happily ever after ending, sorry, spoiler alert, and you start to get the picture of this renaissance of a man. In this conversation, we cover a lot, from defining exactly what embodied coaching is, how it differs from standard or conventional coaching, what its benefits are, how Paul was drawn to somatic coaching, and of course, some conversation about the state of affairs with LGBTQIA in Great Britain, somatic coaching, Scottish folklore, maybe even bargaining. So settle in, get cozy with a cup of tea, and feel like you are part of this conversation, listening intently from a side chair. It's the perfect way to relax and enjoy your day. Welcome, Dr. Paul Taylor Pitt.
Hello, Melissa. You can call me Paul. That's fine.
I just thought we'd be official for podcast listeners here. Yeah, I'm so glad that you're here. And for those of you who are listening, not that anyone really cares, it's 7 a.m. for me, and it's, I think, 3 p.m. for you, Paul. Is that right?
3 p.m. for me. And I'm obsessed with time zones. I can't believe that it's a different time in different places, but time is not real. Isn't it weird? Yeah. It's so weird. It's so bizarre, but I love it.
Yeah, it's really strange, especially, so I've been doing this course, and it's in Bali, And so the time zone is like super different, right? It's like it's the next day. And I'm like, wait, how is that possible? Right? It's another day
That's
for
great.
all
Because
of
then they
these
can
people.
tell you what's going to happen. It's like, was everything okay when you woke up? Yes, it was fine. You go, okay, great. We'll all be all right then.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's really good to see you. For the listeners, Paul was one of, well, the main teacher that I had at the somatic school. And it's just a lovely reconnection opportunity for me, I have to say. So thank you.
And me. It's great to have you to myself.
Yeah, this is unusual. So, I guess where I want to start, I don't know, in the beginning, the day you were born. No. So,
I remember it well.
so somatic school, that's
Mm.
one of the many different things that you do. Tell us a little bit about how you got into somatic coaching and what your interest was for that.
I mean, I can pinpoint the moment actually. And sometimes I have to sort of pinch myself, which is very somatic, uh, to remember how it happened and then to see how I've got to this point with it, because I just find the whole thing a bit of a dream. So, so how long do you want the story to be? Back in the day, remember in the days before COVID,
Yes.
when we used to have different lives. I used to go to the gym every day, and I remember like some of the trainers at my gym are very nice to look at, but not very friendly. You know,
Mm,
they're like just these big vessels of nothing.
mm,
And uh, except for one who always used to smile and say hello when we saw each other. And I thought that was really nice. And then COVID happened and the gym closed, and like everyone, you know, we're stuck at home with a lot of work to do, but actually not much out of work. And then I saw that nice, friendly trainer post on Instagram that he was doing some classes online. And he was doing these classes called Animal Flow, which I'd never really heard of, and which turned out to be a bit like I used to call it my bro yoga sessions, because it's Animal Flow is like this combination of yoga and movement, a bit of Tai Chi. There's a bit of almost like modern dance, a little bit of like martial arts, but it's all very manly. Like it's
yeah.
manly. You know, all the moves are called like alligator and crocodile. You know, it's there's no like budgie or Pomeranian. Everything's really gorilla. And so I used to do these classes with Tommaso, the instructor, and I loved them. I was really into kind of pushing myself to see how I could move in ways that I'd never moved before. And I remember really clearly this one move, which just was ridiculous, where we were, you know, picture me, I'm kind of like on all fours, upside down. And then he was trying to get us to flip ourselves so that we would land facing forward in this squat position. So it's probably, you know, going from like, I don't know, velociraptor into aggressive monkey. And I just couldn't do it. And I kept trying and trying and trying, and I could not get the move. And he said, if you just move one hand this way, move a foot this way, and trust your body knows how to get there. And there was this moment, it was almost like everything went on pause. And then my brain did this like movie style flashback. Because in that moment, I heard myself say, oh, I don't trust my body.
Mm,
And it took me all the way back to school and all the way back to the locker room, you know, the changing room in gym class. And just this realization of being this young gay child that
mm,
actually I couldn't look around when people were getting changed, when other boys were getting changed. And so there was something in that moment back in school where I kind of made this agreement with my body, which was, I don't trust you. You're like a double agent. You're going to give me away. So you can stop and let's all just stay up in our head forever.
mhm.
And I had no idea that that had happened. And so come back to this moment where I'm trying to flip myself into this different place. I kind of realized that, all my life I'd really been living in my head, that I didn't trust my body. And so it was so revealing just from that moment. I did some more work with Tommaso and really tried to understand how my body worked, but I couldn't work out why I didn't trust it as an adult. And so
Mm-hmm.
part of my learning of that was to explore embodied coaching and to explore some somatic work, which then led me to the door of the somatic school. So I then became a student of the somatic school, went through the whole coaching training. And I think that was also a really pivotal moment where I realized, I can learn how to trust myself, and I can learn to be in a place where I can help others to have those moments of realization. And lots of other stuff, post pandemic was happening and lots of changes were going on. And I decided to leave my full time job and go full time self employed or give it a try. And someone from the somatic school contacted me and said, "Oh, we hear you're self employed. Would you like to come and work with us?" And it was just like, honestly, nobody had ever offered me a job before, like just randomly. I'd always had to go through processes and interviews and presentations and PowerPoint. And so
Mm.
there was obviously something that they saw in me as a student that they thought I could bring as a trainer. And so, yeah, I've been very, very lucky to work with the school, to work with amazing students. And yeah, I think I've maybe been through 8 or 9 cohorts now, maybe a little bit
Wow.
more. Yeah, it is. It is wow. And the nicest thing, and actually you were one of the first people, if not the first ever, was when I saw you post that you had got your ACC accreditation. And I thought, ah, I maybe had something to do with that in a tiny little
You
way.
did.
And it was such a moment of pride to see that you had not only completed the course and, been amazing on the program, but then you were going off and doing, external accreditation and all of those things. So that whole thing feels like a dream, from that moment of going, I don't trust my body, to then seeing
Yeah.
people that I have the luxury of working with going on and being qualified and hopefully going out and doing it in the world as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. I was thinking about what you were saying about not having this realization that you had been sort of, my words, floating around in your head
Oh,
for,
trapped, stuck,
yeah.
floating would be nice. It was more like up against the wall of my head, just holding on for dear life.
That's interesting that you use that. And I love that we use such somatic expressions. It wasn't until one of the courses that I was in with you that I realized that's right. Our languaging is very somatic. Like you just
Mm,
said, up against the wall,
yeah,
right? And earlier you said I had to pinch myself.
yeah.
And we have this language, and I've used that language too to describe the up against the wall. Like I felt like for many years, I literally was holding myself against the
Mm,
wall,
mm,
and that there was maybe a sheet of glass in front of me, and I was just sort
mm.
of trapped there. So it's
Sandwiched.
sandwiched between the glass and the wall. And I too didn't trust my body for so long, and I wonder how many people out there could identify with that. I imagine there are quite a few.
Let's take a quick break.
Hey everybody, this is Melissa with the Fully Mindful. It's the new year, and I bet you're feeling the need to unlock your full potential and embrace empowerment, or maybe something completely different. Well, I'm excited to offer a new program with one-on-one breathwork and coaching sessions. We'll embark on a truly transformative journey of self-discovery, combining conscious, connected breathwork and embodiment coaching, and more. So contact me, Melissa, at The Fully Mindful, for your transformative session today.
See, if I was listening to this podcast, if I was in my time machine and I listened to this podcast 3 years ago, I wouldn't have identified with it because it was so unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
I would have listened to it and gone, "Oh, there's people who don't trust their bodies. Oh, that's sad." I wouldn't have thought of that as me because I didn't know it until I had the embodied experience, which then gave me access to that knowing. And so for me, somatic work and particularly working in a body-oriented coaching space, to use another metaphor, was just such a no-brainer. I mean, literally, it was like, okay, brain, thank you. You've done a really good job. You can go now. Your time is up and we need to start thinking in other spaces. But because I'd had that really, just this significant moment that came from a movement. It didn't come from thinking. It didn't come from any kind of analysis or therapy or talking. It was a movement that unlocked it. And so arriving at the somatic school, I was so ready for that. Whereas I think if I hadn't had that experience, I would never have gone to the somatic school. It wouldn't have even registered as a possibility. And I certainly wouldn't have identified as someone who was trapped in my head. I would have just carried on thinking I was doing all right.
Yeah.
This is just normal.
And isn't that interesting? You had to have the experience somatically. Like you said, you couldn't, well, I mean, maybe you could have, but it seems unlikely that any amount of talk therapy, that sort of thing, thinking really hard about it, or even meditating about it would have gotten you there. It was this somatic experience that you had, an embodied experience that brought you to that. Interesting.
Because that was at least 30 years of time, if, with a couple of months or years on the edges of it. Yeah. And so yeah, if it hadn't come in 30 years, it probably wouldn't.
Yeah. So, people might be like, wait, what is this somatic coaching thing that they're talking about? What is that? I mean, I get it has something to do with the body, but like, what are they doing? Are they moving around? Are they, in animal poses? Are they bro yoga-ing? Or like, what is this thing? Can you explain?
I would start from a place of, which I guess is where I came into it. I'd been a coach, like I don't know what we would want to call it, a traditional coach maybe, or a conventional coach. I'd done a lot of coaching in my work, and coaching for me was always a place of holding space for people to do some thinking, that it was based very much in the present day. So it wasn't something that was historical focused. It was looking at what was going on in the present that might be helping or hindering you get to where you want to be in the future. And my role as a coach was really to be curious and to hold some space, use some silence, ask some questions. And at the somatic school, we would describe that as conceptual self-awareness. It's the self thinking about itself. And that's great. Like as a conceptual thinker, you can time travel. You can remember what happened 6 months ago and you can imagine what happens in 6 months' time. And it's great for ideas. It's great for looking at values. It's great for looking at your thoughts and action. Whereas embodied work is really a blend of more conventional coaching with an understanding that the body holds wisdom in the same way that the brain does. And even it's interesting saying that as if the brain is not part of the body. But I guess in our Western culture, we've separated the brain and the body. We talk about the difference between heart and head when we think about thinking and feeling. And so working in an embodied way doesn't stop conceptual self-awareness. It's not about saying, okay, now stop thinking. But embodied work is about the self experiencing itself. And you can only ever do that in the moment. You can't experience something that happened last week. You can remember it, but you can't experience it again. So working as a body-oriented coach is really about holding space as a more conventional coach would do, maybe using some silence like a conventional coach would do, maybe asking some questions, and then also inviting other parts of the person's experience to come and be present in the coaching space. So there might be some movement. It might be, as you were saying earlier about back against the wall. If we were doing some body oriented coaching, then I might invite you to stand against the wall
Mm-hmm.
and play with that. I remember coaching someone who was he was really angry with something that was going on in his family, and we were doing some coaching outside, like we were walking and coaching. And I live in a very built up area. There's lots of big concrete pillars. And he said, I feel like I'm just getting nowhere. I'm just pushing and pushing and pushing and going nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talked about it, and we came up with an idea, which was, see that big concrete pillar over there? How about you go and push it, try and move it?
Mm-hmm.
And he tried. I mean, it was interesting and kind of amusing for both of us, but he really tried to move that concrete pillar. And as he was trying to push it and move it, and it was obviously never going to move, he was reporting on what was going on for him. And so he started talking about just this feeling of frustration and this lack of movement, and how he was becoming angry with himself. And he could just keep going, but he would end up burning himself out. And then that little experiment came to an end, and we carried on walking. And then the question was, is that similar to your other situation?
Mm-hmm.
And it brought up lots of patterns that he noticed in his relationships, which was about feeling frustrated, feeling angry, trying to get movement. And so there's wisdom that we carry in our body that just isn't accessible through thinking. So sometimes it could be using some physical environment space. Sometimes it could be doing some internal work. So using techniques like focusing, which is really about how, as a coach, I can help the client have a conversation with their own client, which is inside them, their felt sense. We also do other kinds of experiments using objects. We use some constellations in our coaching process now. So it can be so many different things, and in the way that coaching can be so many different things. But in a body-oriented practice, we value the body as much as the brain. We value the embodied experience as much as the conceptual experience, and it's always a blend of both.
The Fully Mindful podcast explores what it is to be fully mindful and present in our everyday lives, uncover our worth, and discover our purposes. I'm Melissa Chareau, the host of The Fully Mindful. I'm a neurodivergent lawyer, mindfulness teacher, and embodiment and breathwork coach. On The Fully Mindful, I interview inspiring creatives, wellness leaders, and social disruptors about how they have discovered their purpose or purposes and live a mindful and connected life. Every other episode, I also offer mindfulness and somatic practices that work for everyday people doing everyday things so that we can thrive and be present for the people and causes we care the most about. Find me at The Fully Mindful on all the places that you listen to your podcasts. And I think, and I love that explanation. Thank you. And one of the things that struck me through my experience with somatic coaching, well, a few things. One is the depth, for me anyway, this is how I experience somatic coaching, the depth that I could get to, not just as maybe the client, but also the coach, in a way that really profound. I mean, I've had plenty of coaching. I've coached other people conventionally, and I'm not saying it's not valuable. It's just the depth that we can get to with somatic tools is pretty extraordinary. I mean, it blew me away. There's another somatic language. It literally blew me away how much you could do even in 20 minutes. It's Yeah, it's mind-blowing, no pun intended, right?
Yeah. It constantly amazes me and surprises me. And I hope that I never stop being surprised or amazed. I hope I never take it for granted. Um, and also, I can see it really becoming or starting to creep into the mainstream. I think I can
Mhm.
see, as a school, we're incredibly busy and we're really thriving with the number of people who are finding out about us and coming and training with us. And so something's shifting. And I hope that there's something in the world that's shifting that's maybe encouraging people to not necessarily stop thinking. I never want people to stop thinking, but that realization that I had, which was, oh, I've been thinking all through my life and it's got me so far, but actually there's probably further I could go if I
Mhm.
bring in something else. And so I'm seeing more and more people who are either experienced traditional coaches who say, look, I just want something else. Or it might be that they're very experienced in working with the body, whether they're yoga teachers or, they're working in massage or other techniques who say, there's more to it than this. They want to bring in some of the traditional coaching methods into
Mhm.
that space, or just someone coming into it from a place of, yeah, tired of my job, need a change, need to give myself a bit of care and need to do that for others. And
Yeah.
and I hope that that's maybe significant or signaling some kind of shift in the world. It can't come quick enough, if I'm honest, but just moving away from, I also think it's such a traditional male way of dealing with stuff.
Mhm.
We just think things through, we talk things through, we rationalize everything, we explain everything. One of the things that I loved about body oriented coaching when I was learning was I kept saying things like, oh, it's like science, but with magic. And I couldn't explain why it was working. And there's loads of explanations for why
Mhm.
it's working, but I didn't really need to know them. I really wanted to experience them and feel that sense of wonder. And I think that to me speaks to a different way of showing up in the world and moving away from these traditional conceptual, patriarchal systems where it's just all about, think like this, be like this, do
Mhm.
this, into a much more, I mean, I don't want to get all kind of, preachy about it, but in a much more felt way. And maybe that is the difference as well between thinking and feeling, or thinking and sensing,
Mhm.
is that we privilege thinking over feeling, and we privilege thinking over sensing. And maybe a bit of a generalization, but most of the women I know are better at sensing and feeling than most of the men I know. And they're also really good at the thinking part. So it's not an either or. I just think often, and I work with a lot of men, and it always surprises me how both how much they love the embodied work and how much they've been seeking it without knowing why, but they're just they're trapped in their heads. And I can't even remember the question because I've gone on this massive tour of the patriarchy. But yeah, let's go back to your question.
I don't even remember either. But that's good. It's all right. This is where we are. And what you brought up is really fascinating, both on the male side as well as this privileging the thinking over the feeling and the sensing. And in traditional coaching, or at least this is my impression, I'm sure I'm probably wrong, but it's very it's very cognitive, and it's very
Mm,
much like, I mean, I just was accredited and I'm grateful for that, but having just gone through that, it's very much like, okay, identify what the issue is, get really curious about it, see what the goal is for that session, and get to the goal. And the goal is
yeah,
always like self improvement, self development, something needs to get better or different,
yeah.
right? Which is implicit in that is that there is something wrong instead of there's just an experience.
Hmm. Yeah.
And what I like about somatic coaching is, well, at least for me, it opened up my eyes to like, well, it's the goal could be something as simple as I'd like some insight around this.
Mm,
It doesn't have to be like I'm somehow a better person or I've achieved something, I've checked off the
mm,
box on the SMART goals and I'm good to go. And
yeah,
it doesn't privilege anything. In fact, it's more, if it does, it's the privilege of experience
yeah.
rather than, some goal in the future is somehow better and therefore there must be something flawed right now that I
Mm,
must fix.
yeah. It reminded me a lot of appreciative inquiry, which I'd done, a lot of in my other work. When I've been working with organizations or working with teams or systems who
Mhm.
would often call me in because they felt like something had gone wrong and they wanted to work out what had gone wrong and why. And using something like appreciative inquiry, which starts from a different place, which is actually you're already doing lots of really good stuff. Why don't we look at the good stuff and see
Mhm.
how it could be even better? So it felt quite familiar when I was learning somatic coaching, because then it wasn't about fixing anything. And even for someone who had a very, conventional goal, it might be about growing their business, or it might be about, a relationship difficulty, to be able to just take someone from their brain, because they've thought about it a lot. If they had found a solution, they probably wouldn't be looking for coaching.
Mhm.
And it's about coming to the end of that useful thinking process and then realizing that all of the experiences that you've ever had are stored in your body somewhere, and that
Mhm.
they have so much wisdom and so much teaching for us. And when we just give ourselves the opportunity to access those things, they can bring new insights and fresh awareness and ideas and solutions to those things that we've been really struggling with.
Mhm.
And also things that are not struggling, we're not struggling with, things that we just want to change, but we can't think of a way to do it. So yeah, I love that that was your experience of it, because it's never about fixing anything. It's not about, no one's broken. Um,
Mhm.
we're all whole. And often we just forget that. The world makes us forget that.
Well, yeah, especially, I mean, maybe even more so the whole world, but I just think of the Western world of like, I mean, that's the model, right? Like there's something that you need to buy or do or achieve
Mm,
in order to be better, to have value,
mm.
that we just need to keep moving and moving. I just read this amazing book. You might like it if you haven't read it. Rest is Resistance
Oh,
by
wow.
Tricia Hersey, and it's fantastic. And she developed something called the NAP Ministry, and
Oh, yes, I follow them on
yeah,
Instagram.
yeah, yeah. And her book is because
Okay.
that's what she talks about, right? Is this, I mean, white patriarchal supremacist capitalist society. I'm not trying to get super
Mm,
political here, but just this idea of always trying to produce that even, and she blew me away with this, when you rest, it is for the sake of rest, not so that you are now more prepared for doing more work. And I was like,
mm.
wait, what? Wait, whoa, like,
Yeah,
wow, right? And
yeah.
so, I liken that to me to what somatic coaching is we are doing this not because there's something wrong,
Mm,
although there might be something that is unpleasant
mm,
or difficult, or there's a challenge or a struggle, sure, but there's not something wrong with
mm,
us. It's that we're having this experience and we're inquiring into that experience and sensing
mm,
into that experience, and maybe with the goal of moving beyond that experience if it's a struggle, but
mm,
it's the experience,
mm.
right?
Yeah, totally. And that it goes back to something you said earlier, that this is about the wisdom that someone carries for themselves. They have their own solutions.
Mhm.
They're not looking for a coach to tell them what to do. They're not looking for advice. They're not looking for an answer from someone else. And
Mhm.
it's really beautiful to be able to hold a space for someone. And, so, I know that I still struggle with the idea of needing to be a good coach. And
Mm.
so if nothing changed, technically that's okay. I don't know if I believe that.
Yeah, I know what you mean. With it's that I mean, it'll happen with me in pretty much not every coaching session, but many, where I'm thinking, is this working? Am I doing
Yeah.
enough? Like, oh my God, this is not about me. You know,
Yeah.
we're human.
Yes, we're really human. And I remind myself when I'm in those spaces, I don't have to achieve anything. I don't have
Mhm.
to be a good coach. I have to be, the best coach I can be right now. But that
Yeah.
doesn't mean I've got to be a better coach than anyone else. And often it's in those moments where I then let go and just loosen my grip on it and relax into it, that actually something shifts in the space and maybe the client feels more relaxed because I'm not quite so intent on anything. And then something wonderful happens. And then I go, oh, well, it happened anyway. And so it's kind of reaffirming that, yeah, things always change. It's a privilege. And it's also it still messes with my head sometimes. I have to really try and take myself out of it as much as possible while also hearing this voice that says, well, shouldn't have said that. Don't do that.
Yeah.
No, what are you going to do next? It's almost like just having this constant director's commentary in the background that I just have to try and turn down as much as possible so that I can get out of my own way, because then I can get out of the client's way.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you've always said, and perhaps you hear yourself sometimes, or maybe you heard this from somebody else, which is trust the process.
Mm, yeah. And if you can't trust yourself, trust the process.
Trust the process. Yeah. So what I forgot to ask you, and I meant
Mm,
to, which was I know you've done traditional coaching, but what were you doing before you found some embodied coaching?
mm. Very similar to what I'm doing now, but just in a very different context. So my work really over the past 15 years or so has been in the field of organizational development.
Mhm.
But over the last 25, 30 years, I've always had development in my title somewhere in any job I've had. So whether it's training and development or learning and development or people development or workforce development, all these things. And then I came into the field of organization development, which then just felt like home. It
Mm.
really felt like I'd found my place. And so that involves working at all different levels of systems, helping create the conditions where people can then transform those systems. So
Mhm.
it could be, changing the way an organization deals with culture issues, or it could be about helping an organization feel more capable by developing new skills, or it could be about doing some leadership development. So
Mhm.
I was doing that always in an organization. And then around 15, 16 months ago, I left traditional employment and moved into being self-employed. So now I work with a whole range of different clients in organizations, individually, working with teams, doing very similar work, really looking at, I guess people come to me when they feel a bit stuck.
Mm.
If they're going through some kind of change, either individually or collectively, and they just feel a bit stuck. That tends to be when I get the call. And then alongside that, obviously now working with the somatic school, and then I have my own coaching clients. I also mentor organizational development professionals. And then I've kind of created lots of other space for other stuff that's just really cool. So I do a lot of writing, podcasting. I try to make space for more creative things as well. So yeah, it's an amazing way to live. It's terrifying, but it's brilliant. I love it. And I feel very right in the place that I am now, but it took a long time to feel right enough to be able to make that leap.
Yes, you were writing, and I was following your tales from the edge of unemployment, I think is what you call
Postcards from
it.
the edge of
Oh,
employment. Yeah.
postcards, right. Yes, postcards from the edge of unemployment. And so talk a little bit about that. Like what inspired that and how has that helped you if it has?
Mm. I mean, it was inspired by Carrie Fisher, who was always one of my heroes when I was growing up.
Mhm.
And I was reading Postcards from the Edge for about the fifth time, just at the point when I was thinking about making the leap into self-employment. And so I remember it was so it's a very odd combination of Carrie Fisher and Fraggle Rock, because I remember as a
Okay,
kid,
wait, what?
yeah,
Carrie Fisher and Fraggle Rock.
yeah, all the greats. I remember when I was a kid, I was obsessed with Fraggle Rock. I loved it. And
Mm,
there was this character called Uncle Traveling Matt, who was a Fraggle who left Fraggle Rock and went to explore the world. And each week he would send a postcard back, just talking about something that in the human world was really ordinary and
mm,
boring. But for a Fraggle, it was quite amazing. And so it became this combination where I suddenly went from working. I mean, I was working in the health service. I was working in an organization of 1 million people. And then
wow.
suddenly I was on my own. And I
Hmm.
thought, oh, who am I going to talk to? And so I just imagined that each week I would write a postcard to myself that was just about something that had happened that week that could be completely ordinary or it
Hmm.
could be quite fantastical. And then what was I learning from it? And it was
Hmm.
really about just chronicling the first year of being unemployed and living at this edge of employment. So it helped me because I stopped doing it after the first year because it felt like the right time to finish. And I still miss it sometimes, but I don't feel such a need for it because it helped me work out all of these things that were happening for the first time.
Hmm.
So it was a way of navigating, like, oh, what happens when I get my first client? And oh, what happens when I have to do my first tax return? And what happens when I have to do my first proposal? So it was really just noticing throughout that first year all of these different firsts and what I was learning from them. And, I look back at the early ones and it was also quite maybe bigger things like, oh, do I deserve to be this happy? Or have I got what it takes to live this way? And yeah, it was just a great opportunity for me just to send a little postcard to myself every week, just noticing what was going on. And I saw them and because then I used to post them on Instagram,
Hmm.
um, just as a way of, I saw it a bit like a little message in a bottle, like sending it off into the sea. And if it reached someone else, that was great. And if it didn't, then I got what I needed from writing it. But actually, I used to get lots of really great feedback from people saying, oh, I feel the same, or this happened to me, or try this. It was a great way of staying connected when at times I was feeling disconnected because I was
Hmm.
suddenly doing all of this on my own. So yeah, I really recommend it. I mean, I've never really been one to like keep a journal or a diary. I don't have the discipline to do something every day, but
Hmm.
once a week felt about right because usually there would have been something happening that week that I could go, what does
Yeah.
this mean?
What really happens to us when we die? There is growing evidence that suggests we never really die, but that our eternal souls take a journey from this earthly plane to the afterlife over and over again. Join me, Kristen Taylor, host of How I Made It Through, as I interview psychic mediums and those who have had near-death experiences, as they share insights about why we are here and what we can expect when we transition to the afterlife.
Well, and you had this kind of limited container, right? It's not, 8 pages long, right? It's this
Mm.
this postcard, right?
Yeah, it had to fit on my iPhone screen. That was
Yeah.
that was always the limitation. And initially I thought, because all the way through I was thinking, oh, what could I do with this? And I imagined doing some kind of exhibition at the end, and hanging these postcards so that people could navigate through them. And a friend of mine who's a production designer said, "Oh, you could do it so that they're reflective, so that people are seeing themselves in them." And it got really exciting. And then I just got too busy, and so nothing nothing happened. But I loved the idea that these could be something that you could embody as well as read, that you could walk through them and almost go on that journey. But also, I'm not the first person to go self-employed. In a way, I'm doing something that's pretty universal and, something that I don't know if there would be that much interest in people going, "Oh, what was your experience?" And so I always held for myself that this is for me primarily. If other people got something out of it, that would be great. If I then kind of convinced myself no one would go to an exhibition of my postcards.
Well, I
So
would.
bless you. I'm holding it for maybe something else. But I think that's been the joy of the spaciousness that I've discovered in being self-employed, is that then I got to go and do something else and write some other stuff, or I did a voiceover for my friend's pop-up radio station. Just all these ridiculous things I would never have done before, and so they've kind of taken the place of that reflective postcard.
Although I do love that idea of it being embodied, and in my experience, for whatever it's worth, identification is really huge. So, I come from a recovery space, and that is one of our primary ways of connection is identification. Oh, I see me in you and your experience, and therefore I'm not alone. Right?
Yeah.
And that is like massive. And so if you get an inkling to maybe figure out this exhibition, I would just plant that seed of it might be just for you, but maybe it's also for a lot of other people.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it's interesting because I was going to say still am, an only child. And so I've never really had a problem with being alone. And I love being alone. I love when I go to work in my office that's just for me, and I can close the door and just be there on my own. So I've never had a problem with my own company. And yet I do feel a need I don't necessarily feel the need to belong, but I know that I have this need to create spaces where other people can join. So, a lot of the work I've done is around community building, or it's around, working with particular groups of people, or whether it's working with queer people. I know that I'm very good at kind of magnetizing something that people will then come and be drawn to. And often what will happen is I'll then do it and then walk away and start something else. I don't tend to stick with something. So I'm really good at creating those spaces for people to come and be part of it. But then I go, okay, I'm done with that now. I'll move on. So yeah, I'm now thinking, maybe there is a place for the exhibition, but maybe it's a room in a bigger space. That was one thing. And how cool would it be to then to do something do something else that then becomes another room and then another room, so that it becomes more inviting and more attractive, because it's not just one thing.
Right. No, I love that. And you mentioned some of your other activities, your creativity and whatnot, and that would include your writing. So tell us a little bit about that. What's your most recent project, and what are you working on next?
So my most recent project was an accident, actually. So I've never written anything fictional. I always write nonfiction, and usually it's been either through the research I've done or through the profession I'm in. But through so my friend Steve's an artist, and he'd been asked to curate this pop-up radio station that was taking place in Scotland. And because I'm Scottish and people say I have a nice voice, he said, would I do some of the voiceover stuff? And I was like, of course, it's my dream job. And his co-creator Joe asked if I would read a Scottish folk tale. And she sent me a book that I could go through and I could choose them. And there were some, really lovely folk stories, but they were all, you know, poor woman waits to be rescued by magical man. And I chose one which was kind of, yeah, exactly. I chose one which was like the least offensive, and I read it and it was quite good fun. And then I said to Steve and Joe, could I write one? Could I write my own Scottish folk story, but with a queer perspective? And they said yes, which, I thought, oh, shit, I'm going to have to go and write it now, because I'd never done anything like that. But something just got released. And, again, it felt like a really embodied experience. And so I wrote this short story, the Scottish folktale, which is called The Last Lighthouse Keeper of Lunan Bay. And it was just wonderful to write. I don't know if it's any good, but I recorded it for the radio station. And because I got so into it, it was actually like twice the length it should have been. So they weren't able to use it in the end. And I said, no, that's great. I'll keep it then. And I published it myself just as an audio project. And then I turned it into a book and, Kindle and paperback and stuff. Because I thought, yeah, this is... I'm gonna, if anyone does want to read it, then that would be amazing, and you can listen to it for free. But I'm going to spoil the ending because they live happily ever after. And my inclination, I think, because I have got a bit of kind of dark twistedness, as I was coming to the end, I thought I have to kill one of them off. I have to, one of them has to go. And I thought, no, there's so many stories of LGBTQ people where they live a miserable existence. And so even though it went against my more sort of creative nature, I thought, no, they have to live happily ever after, because I have to put something out there that tells the story that as a, even in a heteronormative world, these characters can be happy.
Yeah.
So it felt really powerful to do that. And, again, maybe it goes back to where we began with that feeling I had of not trusting myself as a young gay child. There was something about being able to own my own story and then write a story about some other people where, yeah, it all worked out okay in the end, but with some, little magical adventures. So that was the last thing I did. And then the current thing I did, sadly, I can't talk about because I'm in the process of hopefully getting a book deal with some publishers. And we're just at the stage where my agent has sent something out. Lots of people are looking at it. And so I can't talk about it. And I wish I could. And if anything changes, then please, can I come back and talk about that? Because I'm so excited. And I really, really want this to work and to happen if it feels like there's a place for it in the world. But yeah, that's again another thing that feels both really exciting and really terrifying, because I've made it happen. I've put myself in this place. No one's making me do it. And if someone then says, yes, we want you to do it, then it's like, oh, great, I've got to go and write a book. How am I going to do that?
Right.
So yeah, in the meantime, I'm just continuing to write bits just to kind of keep myself going.
Keep yourself going. Yeah. I was thinking about, I don't know if you saw The Last of Us, the show on.
Yes. I loved that.
So episode 3, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
Get choked up. Just this beautiful story of 2 gay men who fall in love. Well, one, I don't know if he was always gay, but I don't know what the backstory is, but 2 men fall in love. And it's this it's just, there's so many beautiful moments. And somehow when you were talking about your Scottish folktale and everything working out in a way, even though that episode ends tragically in so many ways, it actually all worked out. And I think it was the first time I had seen something that just works out.
Yeah. And I guess depending on your perspective, and I'll reveal my perspective, life ends tragically for all of us. There is,
we all die.
Yeah, there is an end. And wherever we are at that point, we'll tell the story of whether it was a happy ending or not. And so I loved that episode in particular because it did give such a different experience but they still died at the end. And so there was something in me that was like, oh, I need to write something where the story ends while they're still living and they're happy. And
Right.
it may have
The
been,
true happily ever after. Yeah.
yeah, and it may have been partly in response to that because I thought that was so beautiful, but yeah, they're still dead. And so there's a need for me to see, it goes back to what you were saying, that identification, to see myself in other stories where you can freeze frame at that moment of, yeah, it's okay in the end, even though we
Yeah.
all know that it ends
It's
very
not.
differently at the end. Yeah, even though we know we're all doomed. But to put something out there that just contributes to that sense of, oh, it's okay. I've seen however many countless thousands of TV shows and movies where, a man and a woman get to have that ending. And I've seen so many stories where two men or two women or, people who are outside of the norm don't get to have that ending. And I'm just tired of it. So part of
Yeah.
me thought, yeah, I just have to write it then. If it's not going to be available, then I just have to write it. But I don't know if it's
Yeah.
any good. But in a way, it doesn't matter. If people don't like it, that's none of my business.
I'm sure they do. You know, I wonder what the state of affairs is in Great Britain in terms of queer folk and what's happening, because I know here in the United States, it's my show, so it's a fucking shit show.
Mm,
And it's
yeah.
a very difficult, I mean, it's a very difficult time to
Yeah.
be. And I don't know, is it different there?
I think it's worse. And I think often, you know, um, I think in this country, certainly in the time that I grew up, watching the news and entertainment throughout the 80s and 90s, the US was seen as almost the ideal for us.
Mm.
All of the shows that we watched were American, and there was there was that culture of, Halloween fancy dress parties, all of these things that we grew up aspiring to. And I think we've maybe taken your lead a little bit too far, because you did have your very awful little tenure with that orange man. And I think Britain saw that and went, hold my beer. So we've just, I can't quite believe it. And, in my lifetime, I'm coming up for 50. I only saw progress going in one direction
Mhm.
and experience that for myself, and have the history of living through things where, when I was born it was still illegal for, I grew up in a place where I could never, it wasn't even that I couldn't imagine getting married or having children. It just wasn't an option. It just wasn't talked about. And so things have moved so far forward, and it feels a bit like we've just done a handbrake turn, and we've come to a bit of a screeching halt, and the tires are smoking, and we're now going in reverse. And so it's incredibly hard. And, I feel very privileged in a lot of ways, as a cisgender white man. I know that I have power, and I try to use that power when I can. Um, but it's yeah, it feels like it's getting worse. I had a really um another visceral experience of it, back in the 90s when I was campaigning for like the equal age of consent, which now just feels like such a ridiculous thing to even have to campaign for. I remember wearing lots of really provocative t-shirts, and they weren't even that provocative. It'd be like two men kissing. But in 1992, that was provocative.
Right.
And I used to get reactions from people, but last month, maybe a month ago, it was Trans Pride in London.
Mhm.
And I wanted to show up and be there as a supporter and an ally. And I wore a t-shirt that said trans rights are human rights.
Mhm.
And I've never experienced such aggression from people just as I walked through the streets. And that, it was really scary, really scary. People would look at me and visibly snarl. I walked past one man who was working, on a door, like he was like a doorman in a hotel. And I walked past and he said, "That t-shirt is cringe." And I know that's like almost like quite a childish comment, but the fact that he felt empowered to say it
Right.
made me just go, even in the 90s, I never felt this kind of aggression. And this is me just wearing a t-shirt. For my trans friends and colleagues, that's what they're living every day. I could come home and I could take the t-shirt off. And it's those moments that just make me both determined and angry and, I don't know, more stubborn, I guess, that I can't just stand by. So yeah, I don't want us to end on a horrible note today, but that's life, isn't it? I think we're in a place where it's really hard, and I can see the same happening for people of color, which has maybe in the UK we have maybe a different cultural context to in the US, but certainly I think we are really not far behind in terms of the open racism that I see in the US. And for women, things that were getting so much better just seem to be going backwards again. So yeah, I really feel like if there's hope for me in that, it's that one day the straight, white, cisgender men will realize that they are the global minority and that they're just telling us a story that we've believed, which is that they are the majority. When actually, on an embodied level, when we feel it, we know that that's not true.
Yeah.
And that all of these systems around us are just made up. And the nice thing about them being made up is that we can unmake them. So I feel encouraged that we can get to a place where we can unmake them. It's just going to be a bit shit to get there.
We're going to have to go through some shit to get there. That is no question. But I share your hope that there is another story, another narrative that we can have. It's just going to take a lot of work.
Yeah. And also, as you said, it's together. I mean, last night, my husband and I went to a screening of Barbie, which was not really my first choice to go and see, but I did it because we have an amazing person, a bit of a TV personality called Dr. Ronks, who's on a kids medical show in the UK. And Dr. Ronks is non-binary and very visible, and particularly for youngsters who see Dr. Ronks and go, there's someone like me. And Dr. Ronks hired a cinema, and 500 of us showed up last night to watch Barbie. And you could only buy a ticket if you were part of the LGBTQ plus community. And it felt odd. It felt really odd. I thought, are we not being inclusive? And then I sat down and everyone started cheering. And I thought, yeah, we've been excluded enough. This is our space just for the next 2 hours. And it was the most beautiful experience of hearing 500 people cheering when, Barbie takes down the patriarchy. So that gives me hope that actually, yeah, it is hard to do it alone, but there are others who are with us. So, and I count you in that, Melissa.
Please do. I am right here. Yeah. Well, on that note of togetherness, tell
and
people
Barbie.
And Barbie, which is such a great place to end. Where can people find you? You mentioned podcasts, social media, coaching, all the things. Tell us where you are.
I know, I'm all over the place. I even went on TikTok recently because one of the potential publishers that we were trying to attract said, you need to be on TikTok. And I was like, no, I'm too old, but actually I'm quite enjoying it. I guess the easiest place to find me would be just to go to drpaultaylorpitt.com, and then that's got links to everything else. And then maybe once you've looked at 3 or 4 things, you'll get bored, but it's there. Go and enjoy it.
Let me tell the audience, not true. You are so entertaining and you have such really good content in all the things that you do. I love following you. I love what you do. And it's been a joy to have you on the show. And selfishly, I wish I could just book you on the show every week, because then we could just have conversations like this. But there
I'm here
will be
for that.
next time if you're game.
Oh, totally. And it's, selfishly, to have this time with you one-to-one is just amazing. I'm so glad that you're doing what you're doing in the world. That gives me hope. And yeah, I'll come back anytime you want me.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. And I will make sure to put all the things in the show notes so that people have an opportunity to find you if they're not an audio person and they didn't write it down while they were driving. They can see it right there in the show notes, and
Yeah,
you'll
don't
want
write it down when you're driving. Stay safe, folks.
Stay safe. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa.
Hey, everybody. If you like this conversation, make sure to rate the show in Apple or Spotify or wherever you are listening so that others can find it and enjoy it too. And if you like the show and want to keep hearing great conversations with really interesting people about how they found their purpose, please donate to the show. Go to thefullymindful.com to donate today. Hey, everybody, it's Melissa, and I'm wondering if you all can relate. Have you ever caught yourself procrastinating or maybe doubting your abilities, or maybe you have a black belt inner critic like I do or have had that wants to sabotage your every move with judgment and perfectionism expectations? It might keep you stuck, it might keep you anxious and away from your full potential. The Positive Intelligence Program, PQ, is a powerful 6-week journey designed to help you quiet those saboteurs, embrace positivity, and find flow in your life. Through daily practices and weekly focuses, we'll work together to build your mental fitness. The PQ app will guide you every step of the way and support you, and you'll be supported either by myself in a one-on-one or in a small group of like-minded individuals where you can share insights and progress. So reach out, contact me at info@thefullymindful.com to find out how we can work together one-on-one or in a small group today.